Hi guys, Gabi from UiPath Hacks here. Today's video is about hacking the RE-Framework in UiPath. What do I mean by hacking? No, not what we see in the movies, but actually understanding the framework to such an extent that we will be able to alter and tweak it to better fit our needs without worrying it will stop working altogether. This is not a beginner's video, so if you have never used or even heard of frameworks in UiPath, or if you are not really clear how a framework works, what are the machine states and their roles and how does the config file work, please first watch my beginner's video on this topic and get some hands-on experience, and afterwards come back and watch this video. In this video, we will review the following points: how to configure the framework to work with databases rather than queues, how to configure the framework for a non-repetitive process, like running a report, for example, how to configure the framework to run in background, and how to publish our own frameworks for our own specific needs. Let's start with the first point: how to configure the framework to work with databases and data rows rather than queues and queue items. Now, first of all, why would we need to do that? Maybe because of speed. If we have a very simple process where we just read something from Excel and use the resulting database, rather than having a proper dispatcher that loads a queue and we work with those queue items further. The queue offers much better maintenance and overview and control on the data, but sometimes we just don't need that. And in this example, we will work and convert the framework that we have built in the basic framework tutorial, where we have just built a simple application to sum up numbers. We have an input data with numbers in Excel on 2 columns. And basically, this automation is adding a results column and adding up the pair of numbers. And to achieve that, basically, it has a very simple XAML workflow called a dispatcher. And this one reads the input file, and for each row in the input file, creates a QueueItem and loads the data on a queue in Orchestrator, and then the framework, in our example, pulls each item and sums up the results. So in our case, we will not need a dispatcher because we will not work with queues anymore. So we can just go ahead and delete this right now. And we'll try to do the same exercise, the summing up, using databases rather than queues. So the first thing we'll need to do is to change a very small thing in the config file. If you remember from the first video, we have one parameter which is taken from the queue normally by default. So we have this maximum retry number, which is by default 0. It means if we are working with queues, then the robot will take this value from the definition of the queue rather than from this file. But as we don't have queues anymore, we might want to maybe increase this number to, let's say, 2. So in case of a system exception, the framework will try 2 times to process the same item. So it's something important to keep in mind if you are not working with queues anymore and you don't define this value at the queue level in Orchestrator. So once this is out of the way, we can just concentrate on our framework here. Now, the first obvious thing that we need to change is, of course, the transaction item data type. So we have here this transaction item, which is a queue item. And if we are working with tables, we have to change this to a table row. So we have the queue and data table, and the queue item then would correspond to the data row. So we have to change the type of this transaction item, first of all, to DataRow. I'll save. And as we do this, we will have a number of errors all of a sudden, because now we have to update the types of all the of all the arguments. We have in and out arguments for the transaction item. Let's start with the GetTransactionData workflow. We have it here. So let's open the workflow first. Let's look at the arguments. So we have the out transaction item, a QueueItem, and we need to update this to a DataRow. So I will do that, hit enter, save. We'll come back to this error. Let's finalize changing our types first, and then I will import the arguments. And I have here my out transaction item, which is now blank because the type has been changed. So I have to put back the transaction item variable here, the value. Otherwise, I will not pass over anything. And let's do the same thing to the process workflow. We have it here. Let's open it. Let's open the arguments. Now we have an in transaction item, which is being fed. So we have to update this to DataRow. Let's hit an enter. Let's close this and let's import the arguments again. We have a DataRow now, and let's put back the transaction item value. Okay, so that's done now. Let's make this 80% to view it better. All right. So we still have some errors to solve. Let's go back to the process transaction workflow. We have here a finally, and we have the SetTransactionStatus. I think we have also to change here the arguments. So QueueItem becomes DataRow. Now, the next thing we have to change is also in the SetTransactionStatus. If we go back to the workflow, we see we have some errors here. And that's because we are setting the status of the QueueItem here. And now that we are not working with queues anymore, we basically don't need this anymore here. We can just maintain the status somewhere else. For example, like we could add a column in our data source and maintain it there. But for now, we will just delete this, and we have to do this for the other two branches. So delete this activity as well, go back, and also delete this activity here. We have two activities here. We are also having a return number. We don't need it anymore, so we delete the whole block. All right, and now let's go back to our framework. Let's see if we have any other errors. Apparently we do in the GetTransactionData here. Yeah, this activity now has an error, even though the transaction item is now a DataRow. Apparently it thinks it's a QueueItem. So this is kind of a bug, I think. What we need to do is kind of delete it and put it back in. So we'll just assign transaction item to nothing. I'm not sure why this is not being updated here. But let's reassign it. There it goes, and we have one more error here. I think we have something in exception or finally. Yeah, in exception. Basically the same issue. We could just delete this and recreate it. If anybody knows why this is happening, other than just being a bug, please comment in the comment section below. It would be really interesting to find out why this happens. But anyways, I think that's fine now. I don't see any other error being reported here. And what we still need to do is now to change the way we are getting our transaction data. So if we go back here to the GetTransactionData workflow, we have one more error here because we are getting the transaction item with a GetQueueItem activity, and that makes no sense now anymore. Basically, what we need to do is here read our data table on the first run, and then keep taking rows from this data table. So it's important to, first of all, know if we are doing the first run, and for that we can use an if activity. And here we need to check basically what is our transaction number. And we have here an argument, an in transaction number, which tells us that. So we can just say if the in transaction number equals 1, then we know it's the first run. And if we are on the first run, we need to basically do two things. One is to read the data, and second is to assign a data row as the first one. So to read the data, we will use the read range, and we will use the workbook one. And here, basically, we have to give it the path to this file, input data, and we have this path here in the input file in the settings. So we will say in config input file, in config, and then input file. And of course, we have to make it a string, so toString. Sheet 1, that's correct. And then we have to update to read the whole sheet, and then the output data table will be this input-output transaction data. That's already here, it's available. Perfect, let's save it. And then the second activity we have to have here, it's a simple assign. And basically we want to have the out transaction item being assigned the first row of this input-output transaction data. So we do that, we do rows, and then we say in transaction number -1, because we want to start with basically 0. So the transaction number is 1 now, but the table or the first row is number 0. So we will do the in transaction number -1. So basically the first row of the input-output transaction data. All right, so that is the first if. And then if we are not on the first run, we have to add one more if block here. And we say if the transaction data rows count is higher or equal than the in transaction number. So we are not on the first run, but we have not finished going through the whole data table. So we still have rows. And basically we have to assign then the next transaction item, and we can just copy this activity from here. Or just copy here the values. So we take the next item, and if we have reached the end of the table, then we have to assign the value nothing to the out transaction item. All right, so if we have rows still, we take the next one. If we have reached the end, then out transaction item becomes nothing, and then the process will stop. All right, let's do a last check before we finalize the changes to the framework. So let's make sure that transaction item has been assigned as a value to the process XAML flow. So we have it here defined, it's good. Remember to do that. And also in the invoke, in the SetTransactionStatus. And we have to do the same in the arguments for the SetTransactionStatus workflow. So we have nothing now because we have deleted, we have changed the type of the argument. We need to give it the same value of transaction item here as well. Perfect, that's done. That basically was the last change we need to apply to the framework to change the way it's taking the items from a table as opposed to a queue. And now that the framework is set up, let's think about the implementation of our example of summing up numbers from Excel file. So we've already seen that the dispatcher is not needed anymore. Previously we've had a dispatcher loading data to the queue. Now we've deleted that workflow already. So we have to change the way we pull the data. We have previously been using the specific content method for the QueueItem. That needs to be changed now. So let's go to the process workflow. We are building a data table and adding a row to it, and then appending that value to the output sheet. And while adding that row, we are doing the summing up here. So we have basically the first item, and now we don't have the specific content anymore, this method, because we are taking directly column A from this data table and making it a string, and then an integer. Then we have the same for column B. I'll get rid of the specific content. And then here we are summing up the two values. I will just do the same, delete the specific content. And that should be the only thing we need to change. And that should be it pretty much. We can try to run now. Let's see if it runs. Okay, so apparently we have deleted the files manually and didn't refresh here. So it thought it had some files, which it didn't anymore. Let's run again. Perfect, it has gone through the 3 items, no error. Let's check the output data file. And here we are, we have the result column now and the values being summed up. So basically this concludes converting a framework using queues to a framework using data tables. And we've seen also how to change an existing example from using queues to using data tables. Now for the second item for today, how to configure the framework for a non-repetitive process. We often need to run different reports, simple reports, which don't need to process several items one after the other. But we might still want to use the framework to do that because we have a lot of exception handling and logging already there for us. So now that we have already a framework which is working without queues, it's very simple to do that. Basically, we have to make sure we have to expect only one item. Of course, we can really hack the framework and delete that GetTransactionData state altogether and everything and rebuild it, because we don't expect to have this repetition here of getting one item, processing it and going back. But a very simple and quick way to do that is to just go to the GetTransaction Data workflow, where we have our 2 ifs. If it's the first run, and if not, basically take the rest of the rows. And here what we have to do is just delete or comment this if block, because this will make sure that we only go here, we get the first one, we read our data, we take the first row. In this case, it's only one, so it will be only one transaction, and that's it. Then we move to the process block, we do whatever we do here, and we end the process. So this is a very simple and quick way to, I will just uncomment it back. This is a very simple way to convert our repetitive non-queue framework to a non-repetitive framework. And of course, doesn't matter if it's queue or non-queue anymore. So this is a very quick hack to use still a framework with just one non-repetitive process, like running a report and then doing some quick Excel work and sending an email with it. All right, so we've seen how we can change our framework from working with queues to working with data tables and then making it even non-repetitive. Now let's talk about something really exciting and rather new, how to configure the framework to run in background. As of Orchestrator 2020 4.1, released around May this year, 2020, headless processes are supported. I've talked about this topic in one of my previous videos, so if you want to check out that video, I will put it in the description below, as well as in the right upper hand corner of the screen. And you'll see there what is new in Orchestrator as of this year. So if you want to check out that video and what else is new in Orchestrator, please check out the link in the description below or the link in the right hand corner. What does a headless process mean? UiPath no longer restricts us to executing background processes using distinct users. So we can now execute as many such processes on the same user at the same time, as long as we make the job unattended. There is one distinction though: the same user can execute multiple background processes and a singular UI requiring process at the same time to avoid conflicts. So let's see what we need to do to make our process background run ready. So let's run the process we've just created and maybe introduce a delay activity in the process workflow just to allow it to run for a slightly longer period of time and observe if it runs in parallel or not. So we can add a delay activity somewhere here. Let's make it 30 seconds, for example. All right. And we will run this in parallel with a different process. For that, I've created a very simple process which basically opens Notepad, writes a text inside, and closes the application. So let's look at our agent. We will use this front-end process here. And before we run it, we have to publish, of course, our framework. So let's call it RE-Framework non-queue. All right, the project has been successfully published. Let me log on to Orchestrator again. And let's look at our processes. I will create a new process. I will select the RE-Framework non-queue that we've just created. All right, I'll create this process and I should be able to get it now on my assistant. Let me install it here. All right, that's done. And now let me start this non-queue framework, and I will start also let me start the front-end process, and I will start the RE framework as well. And we observe that it is currently in pending status because another front-end process is currently running. All right, now that's finished, and then we can run this one as well. So we see that by default, the standard RE framework runs in foreground or is not background run ready. So I'll stop the job for now. And let's see how we can make our framework run in background. And for that, we need to do three things. First one is to go to our packages and delete the UI automation activities. Of course, if we want to run in background, we don't need this one here. It's safer to just delete it. The second one is to get rid of our testing folder, because these tests here are running different foreground processes. So I would just delete the full folder. And from the framework, we have to get rid of the take screenshot process as well. So let me delete this as well. They're not here anymore as well. Good. And then the third thing I need to do is open the project JSON file. I will open it with Notepad. And we have here one label which tells Orchestrator if we are running this in background or foreground. It is called requires user interaction. And it's right here. It's set to true by default, and we have to set it to false. So I will put false here, I will save. So these three activities should make my framework run in background. So what I'll do now is I've saved, I will publish again. Right, it has been published. Let me go to the process, refresh, view process. Strange, I don't have my second version. Let me check that. Okay, so we've published our automation, but we can't see here the new version. I see only one version. So we have here the package non-queue. Let's check Studio. Okay, and here we have hacking queue. So we have used here the wrong package. I would just take this one here now and publish. Okay, let's check now. Perfect, we have here the new version. So use this one. Now let's open our assistant, waiting install. We have a new version here, let's install it. All right, and now let's start the same thing. Let's start the front end process and then our non-queue process, which should run in background right now. Run this, and we run interesting. So we have an error. It still seems to run in foreground. All right, it failed running. Okay, let's see why. Apparently we still have here the requires user interaction, so it means that it's probably something wrong with our project JSON file. Let's open this again. Requires user interaction. Okay, it's again true. So probably at some point it got overwritten. Okay, let's try one more thing. Let's modify here our project settings. We have here our name, and we have a start in background. And let's put this on yes. Let's see if that would work. Let's see what's happening with our project JSON file now. Good, we have it false here. Let's try to publish. Perfect, we have this message. This is good. I think it's what we need. Hacking.queue, publish. Perfect, and now let's go to orchestrator. Let's look at our packages here, refresh. And now it's background process. Perfect, it looks good. Let's go to our processes. Let's add a new process. Add our package. All right. Create. Looks good. And now let's pull up our assistant. Let's install the package. Now we will run our framework background process and then our front-end process. And we see that both processes have started in the same time. They are both running. We can look in orchestrator as well. They are both running. So we've just managed to make our framework run in background by doing these changes. And apparently we've had to, okay, so the first front-end process has finished and the background is still running because we have that delay of 30 seconds. Great. So what we need to do apparently is to also go here and update this option in project settings rather than doing it manually in the project JSON, because this kept being overwritten by the setting here defined in Studio. So I think that's the way to do it, change it here rather than manually in the project JSON file. So basically we've seen how to convert now our non-queue framework to running in background. And the last thing we might want to do is to now publish and reuse our new framework. We've seen how we've created a non-queue one, we've seen how we've created a non-repetitive one and the background framework. So we have already 3 new framework templates, and we might even want to add new templates for our company's needs with integrating some reporting bits and pieces in different parts of the workflow. So how can we now publish this template and use it from Studio directly rather than just copy pasting the source files? So we can go in Studio and press here the export as template button. And what it does, basically this creates a template and copies all the files separately. Let's give it a name. So RE-Framework let's call it non-queue background. All right, and it will just save it at this location. So we just export it for now. All right, we can open the exported process. This has created some files here. So these are the files. All right, and basically it has saved the template separately from our process that we have worked on until now, just to make sure that if we change our process in the future, it will not affect the template. So now this template is standalone. And now what we need to do is publish this to Orchestrator. And we can try it directly from here. Right? It says it has been posted successfully, and we can find it in the templates page. And here it is. We have our RE-Framework non-queue background template already available here in the studio. So we can then just use it and start a new process from this template directly. All right, I've also encountered an error here when trying to do this. The first time I tried this, and if you do encounter an error when publishing the template, you can go to Settings in your tenant, Deployment, and allow both host and tenant feeds. I've done it once before for testing purpose. If it doesn't work from the first time, just allow this option here and try to publish again your template. All right, so this concludes our advanced RE-Framework tutorial. We have seen how to transform the standard template into a non-queue one, then into a non-repetitive one. We have also seen how to transform the template into a background running process, and at the end, how to save it as a template for easier later usage. If you found this video useful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel, as it will help the channel immensely and incentivize YouTube to propose this video also to other people interested in the topic. Thank you for watching and have a great day.